Before history began. There are moments in human history when silence speaks louder than any written word. Moments where the absence of memory feels deliberate, like someone or something wanted us to forget. Buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia lies a relic that defies the very notion of time, the Sumerian King List, a cuneiform text carved into clay more than 4,000 years ago. On its surface, it looks simple, a chronicle of kings and dynasties that once ruled the cradle of civilization. But when you read the list closely, when you follow the reigns of each monarch, a chilling mystery emerges. It begins not with the rise of kings, but with a declaration that rewrites history itself. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. That one line, descended from heaven, shatters everything we think we know about our origins. It doesn't say the kingship was created or was chosen by men. It says it descended, as if something divine, something beyond the earth, came down and handed over civilization. And then comes the part that has haunted historians, archaeologists, and seekers for nearly a century, the reigns themselves. Some kings are said to have ruled for 28,800 years, others 36,000, some even 43,200 years. In total, before the Great Flood, the Sumerian King List records 200 Mantwari in 200 years of rule, an age that mocks the boundaries of human life and reason. How could anyone have ruled for tens of thousands of years? Were these numbers symbolic, meant to convey divine legitimacy? Or could they preserve the echo of something far older, a forgotten epoch when gods walked beside men? When the first fragments of the King List were unearthed in the early 1900s at the ancient site of Larsa, scholars dismissed it as myth. They said the Sumerians exaggerated their kings, turning mortal rulers into demigods. But others saw something deeper. They noticed that the names of these ancient kings mirrored those of mythic beings from the Anunnaki pantheon, the celestial deities said to have shaped the world and mankind itself. If that's true, then perhaps the King List isn't a history of men at all. Perhaps it's a coded memory of the divine order, the lineage of those who ruled the earth before the age of humanity truly began. The air of southern Mesopotamia carries whispers of this memory still. In Eridu, the first city, the place where kingship descended, archaeologists found layers upon layers of temples, each one built atop the ruins of the previous. The oldest layer, a small mud brick structure dated to around 5400 BCE, was dedicated to Enki, the god of wisdom and the abyss. To the Sumerians, Enki wasn't just a deity, he was the engineer of civilization, the bringer of language, law, and science. He was the first to grant kingship, the first to teach humanity how to build. And so perhaps the King List was never meant to be read literally, but ritually. Each reign was a cycle of divine order, each king a symbol of a cosmic age. The Sumerians weren't describing history as we understand it. They were describing time itself. The idea of cosmic reigns spanning thousands of years isn't unique to Sumer. The ancient Egyptians spoke of the Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods ruled the land before pharaohs existed. The Hindus have their Yuga cycles, spanning hundreds of thousands of years. The Greeks told of the Golden Age, when Kronos himself ruled the earth. Could it be that all these traditions are echoes of the same forgotten truth? A truth preserved in stone, clay, and myth? If so, the King List isn't just an artifact. It's a doorway, a timeline that begins before history began, before the flood, before mankind learned to write, when the boundaries between gods and men were blurred and time flowed differently. But who first recorded this timeline? Who dared to preserve these impossible reigns in cuneiform, knowing future generations would dismiss them as fantasy? And why did the Sumerians insist that all kingship came from heaven? Whatever the answer is, it lies buried deeper still, in the origins of Eridu, the city of the first king, and the temple of Enki himself. Because before there were empires, before there was history, there was something else, something the ancients called the descent of kingship. Eridu, city of the first kings. When archaeologists first arrived in southern Iraq in the 1940s, they found little more than a sun-scorched mound near the dried bed of an ancient river. To most, it was just another forgotten ruin in the endless desert. But to those who could read cuneiform, this site had a name written into the oldest stories of humankind: Eridu, the first city. According to the Sumerians, Eridu was where kingship first descended from heaven. It wasn't merely the first city on earth, it was the first seat of divine order, the birthplace of civilization itself. Long before Babylon, before Uruk, before even Sumer had a name, Eridu stood as the threshold between heaven and earth. Archaeologists like Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd would later confirm that beneath the dunes lay a stack of temples, 17 layers deep, each one built upon the ashes of the previous. The deeper they dug, the older the structures became, until they reached a small, humble shrine of mud brick. It was dated to around 5400 BCE, and its dedication tablet bore a single name: Enki. To the Sumerians, Enki was not only the god of water and wisdom, but the keeper of Mi, the divine laws that governed existence. He was the architect of human consciousness, the one who taught mankind how to write, irrigate, and dream. And it was said that he built his temple in Eridu because it stood upon the Abzu, the primordial waters of creation. In the myths, Enki's temple was called Abzu, the house of the deep. It was said to connect directly to the underworld seas, the hidden reservoir of divine knowledge beneath the earth. To the priests of Eridu, this was not symbolic. It was literal. The temple was the interface between realms, where divine kingship first emerged into human form. But what does it mean that kingship descended from heaven? To modern readers, it sounds like a poetic metaphor, a way of saying that authority came from the gods. But to the ancient Sumerians, this phrase was precise, almost technical. Heaven, or An in Sumerian, was not an abstract idea. It was a physical realm above, home to the Anunnaki, the celestial council of deities who governed the destinies of worlds. When kingship descended, it wasn't an idea. It was an event. Some researchers believe that the earliest rulers of Eridu were considered avatars of divine forces, hybrid custodians between mortal and celestial. Their reigns, measured in thousands of years, symbolized the rhythm of the cosmos. Each king didn't live for 2800 years. He represented an entire era, an age of the world. The King List, then, was not a record of lifespan, but of cosmic cycles. Still, even this interpretation can't erase the enigma that Eridu presents, because when you stand among its ruins, when you imagine the temple terraces shimmering in the desert sun, the priests chanting hymns to Enki over the scent of burning cedar, you feel something older than myth, something intentional, something remembered. Why did all ancient civilizations share the same idea of the first city? The Egyptians had Heliopolis, where the Benben stone of creation first rose. The Hebrews spoke of Eden, the garden watered by 4 rivers. And here the Sumerians built Eridu, beside the marshes of the Persian Gulf, once surrounded by fertile deltas and flowing water. Could all these first places be memories of one lost origin, a single cradle of civilization that existed before the known dawn of humanity? The ancient text, known as the Eridu Genesis, offers a haunting clue. It describes how the gods decided to bless mankind with kingship and wisdom, but as humanity grew corrupt, they also sent the flood to cleanse the world. Only Ziusudra, the pious king of Shuruppak, was warned, echoing the later story of Noah. After the flood, kingship descended again, and Eridu was rebuilt. This cyclical descent, fall and renewal, destruction and rebirth, suggests that the Sumerians viewed history not as a straight line, but as an eternal spiral. Civilizations rise, fall, and rise again, each time reconnected through the same divine thread that began in Eridu. Today, Eridu lies silent, a mere shadow beneath the desert wind. Yet, satellite imaging reveals that it once sat at the edge of a vast body of water. possibly the ancient Persian Gulf before sea levels receded. Could it be that Eridu's oldest layers belonged to a time when the region looked entirely different, when the world before the flood still existed? If so, the city of the first kings may hold the last geological traces of a forgotten epoch, the time when the divine and the mortal shared the same breath. And if the King List preserves the memory of 241,200 years of divine reigns, then Eridu is the 0 point, the origin of that countdown, the place where history, myth, and eternity intersected for the very first time. But as we descend deeper into this mystery, a new question arises. If Eridu was the first city, then who was its first king? The tablets give us a name that has echoed through thousands of years, a figure half remembered, half divine. His name was Alulim, the first to rule after kingship descended from heaven, and his story may be the key to understanding how humanity first learned to rule under the guidance of gods. Alulim, the first king of earth. The King List opens with a single haunting declaration. After kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Just one line. But in that single sentence lies the entire mystery of human civilization. Alulim, a name whispered across millennia, marks the first time a human being was given the authority to rule, not by conquest, not by inheritance, but by descent. According to the Sumerians, he was not born of ordinary blood. He was chosen by the gods themselves. In Alulim, the divine order took flesh. Yet who or what was Alulim? The ancient texts offer no physical description, no grand story of battles or monuments, only the length of his reign, 28,800 years. To modern ears, that number sounds absurd, impossible. But to the Sumerians, numbers were never arbitrary. They were sacred, mathematical symbols of the cosmos itself. The number 28,800 divides evenly into cycles of 3,600, a unit known as the Sar, representing a complete era in Sumerian cosmology. 8 Sars make up Alulim's reign. The same number appears throughout Mesopotamian myth, marking periods of planetary motion, solar patterns, and divine rhythm. Alulim's rule, then, was not measured by the turning of seasons, but by the movement of heaven. To the Sumerian mind, Alulim wasn't a man sitting on a throne. He was the embodiment of order, the first bridge between mortal and divine. Before him, there was only chaos, the wild land of untamed waters and wandering tribes. Under his reign, mankind learned the rhythm of the stars, the art of governance, and the laws that distinguished the sacred from the profane. But here's where the story takes a strange turn. The mythic texts known as the Instructions of Uruk and fragments of the Eridu Genesis describe a time when the kingship was sweet and pure, when humanity lived in harmony with the gods. The air was rich, the rivers generous, and the land yielded grain without toil. It was an age before decay, a golden age, ruled by divine intelligence. Could this be what the King List remembers? A memory of humanity's lost equilibrium when rulers governed not by greed, but by cosmic law? Many scholars interpret Alulim as a mythological placeholder, a poetic symbol for the dawn of kingship. Yet the very precision of the King List, the methodical recording of names, cities, and durations, feels too structured for pure allegory. It reads less like legend and more like recorded myth, a documentation of something the Sumerians considered real. And if Alulim's 28,800-year reign was a symbolic calendar, what exactly did it measure? Some researchers, such as Samuel Noah Kramer, suggested that these immense durations might preserve an ancient system of precessional astronomy, cycles of time based on the shifting of the Earth's axis over millennia. Each reign could represent a precessional age, linked to the movement of the stars and the constellations that governed fate. If true, then Alulim might not have been a person at all, but a symbol for the age of Eridu, the epoch when divine consciousness first entered the human world. The myth of Alulim also parallels other first rulers of ancient cultures. In Egypt, it was Ptah, the divine craftsman, who first organized the world. In India, Manu was the progenitor king, guided by the gods to establish the first law. In China, Fuxi taught humanity how to write, fish, and weave nets, ruling for thousands of years before the Great Flood. Across continents and eras, the same pattern repeats. A divine ruler emerges from the heavens, reigns for impossibly long ages, and teaches mankind the tools of civilization. Could these all be linguistic and cultural echoes of a single memory, an event remembered differently by each ancient people? Imagine Eridu at the height of Alulim's rule, canals winding through green plains, temples gleaming with lapis and copper, the scent of incense rising from altars beside the Abzu, scribes pressing wet clay with wedge-shaped signs, recording laws whispered from the priest-kings, everything under the watchful gaze of Enki, the god who raised Alulim to kingship. But paradise is never eternal, for even in the oldest tablets, the text shifts suddenly. After Alulim's reign, another king follows, Alalgar of Eridu, ruling for 36,000 years. Then more names, more numbers, until something cataclysmic happens. Then the flood swept over the land. Between Alulim's first rule and the flood's destruction lies a chasm of 241,200 years, a span that defies imagination. Were these eons of peace and divine order, or were they cycles of rise and decay, remembered as one endless age of gods and kings? Modern science tells us that Homo sapiens emerged roughly 300,000 years ago. The King List's pre-flood era begins almost exactly within that same timescale. Coincidence? Or could the ancient scribes have preserved a distorted echo of humanity's prehistory, passed down from an age before writing, before agriculture, before the memory of the flood itself? If Alulim was the first king, perhaps he was also the first symbol of memory, the one who turned divine revelation into recorded law. And in doing so, he marked the beginning of time as we know it, because history does not truly begin with writing. It begins with kingship, the moment humanity believed order could come from the heavens. But as the ages rolled forward, the perfection of Alulim's rule began to fracture. The divine pattern grew unstable, and the kings that followed seemed less celestial, more human. And then, in the far distance of time, came the event that would end that world forever, the Great Flood, the flood that erased 241,200 years. Every ancient civilization remembers a moment when the world drowned. The Sumerians called it the Flood, when the gods grew weary of mankind and sent waters to cleanse the earth. The Hebrews called it the Deluge, when Noah built his ark. The Greeks told of Deucalion, who survived when Zeus washed the world clean. And the Aztecs, the Hindus, the Chinese, all spoke of a time when the heavens opened and everything living was swallowed by the sea. For the Sumerians, this cataclysm marked the end of an era, the dividing line between gods and men. Before the flood, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years, divine shepherds guiding humanity in peace. After the flood, the same list records reigns of only hundreds, then mere decades. Something had broken, something irreversible. Then the flood swept over the land. After the flood had swept over the land, kingship descended from heaven a second time. Those words, simple, deliberate, are perhaps the most important in the entire King List. They tell us that the flood didn't just destroy the world, it reset it. It was a cosmic reboot, a deliberate act that separated divine rule from human rule. It was, in essence, the moment when the age of the gods ended and the age of man began. But was this flood merely myth or memory? In 1929, a young archaeologist named Leonard Woolley was excavating the ruins of Ur, one of the great Sumerian cities. As his team dug through layers of ancient soil, they found something unexpected, a thick stratum of pure clay, 8 feet deep, completely devoid of artifacts. Beneath it were traces of an older civilization. Woolley took samples, tested them, and realized what he was seeing wasn't a normal river deposit. It was evidence of a massive flood that had buried the region thousands of years ago. He wrote, almost in awe, "There is no question that a great flood swept over southern Mesopotamia and destroyed its settlements. It must have been overwhelming." Geologists later confirmed that around 10,000 to 6,000 BCE, the sea level in the Persian Gulf rose dramatically as the last ice age ended. Massive glacial melt caused floods across Mesopotamia, submerging vast plains beneath hundreds of feet of water. Could this be the historical foundation of the Sumerian flood myth? Or was the story of the flood much older still, reaching back to the shadowed age before recorded time, the 241 and 200-year reign of the divine kings? Some scholars suggest the flood represented more than a natural disaster. It was a cosmic transition. In Sumerian theology, water was both destruction and creation, chaos and renewal. The god Enki, whose temple lay at the heart of Eridu, ruled the deep waters, the Abzu, and was both protector and trickster. It was Enki who warned Ziusudra, the last pre-flood king, to build a great vessel before the storm came. The story is hauntingly familiar. A wall stood before Ziusudra, and Enki spoke to the wall, "Tear down your house and build a boat. Leave possessions behind, seek life. Bring the seed of all living things into the boat." When the flood came, Ziusudra survived. The waters raged for 7 days and 7 nights, then calmed. He offered a sacrifice, and the gods, moved by his devotion, granted him eternal life. Sound familiar? It's nearly identical to the later story of Noah in the Hebrew Bible. The flood, it seems, is not just myth. It's a shared ancestral memory, passed from civilization to civilization, like a coded message. But what was the message? Perhaps the Sumerians weren't simply describing a flood of water, but a flood of time, a collapse of the old world order. The deluge may have symbolized the end of divine consciousness on Earth, when humanity lost direct contact with the gods. After that, kingship descended from heaven again. But something was different. The new kings were mortal, limited, fallible. The world after the flood was not paradise reborn. It was the beginning of struggle. Archaeologically, we see this shift reflected in the sudden rise of city-states after 4000 BCE. Humanity, once guided by mythic rulers, now had to govern itself. The gods had withdrawn, and in their absence, mankind built temples, ziggurats, and laws, imitations of divine order. The flood erased the physical landscape, but it also erased memory. What came before, those impossible reigns of Alulim, Alalgar, and the ancient kings, faded into legend. The survivors rebuilt, but their world was smaller, their lifespans shorter, their gods more distant, and yet the King List remembered. It preserved in secret the names and years of a forgotten epoch, the age before the waters rose. Why did the Sumerians keep this memory alive? Why write of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years if no one believed such things could ever be real? Perhaps they were trying to preserve the echo of divine time, the rhythm of eternity disguised as history. The flood was not only the end of that rhythm, it was the moment humanity was cast out of sacred chronology and into linear time. From this point forward, history would be measured not in cosmic cycles, but in years, in reigns, in the fragile span of mortal kings. But one question still haunts the edges of the story. If kingship truly descended from heaven after the flood, then who or what brought it back? The return of kingship, rebuilding, after the flood. When the floodwaters receded, they left behind not only a changed landscape, but a changed humanity. The Sumerian King List says it with chilling simplicity. After the flood had swept over the land, kingship descended from heaven a second time. In Kish, Enmenluwana became king. He ruled for 43,200 years. It's as if the heavens themselves pressed restart. The world before the flood, Eridu, Alulim, the divine order of the Anunnaki, had been wiped away. But the covenant between gods and men was not entirely severed. Kingship, That sacred bridge returned once more, this time to a new city, Kish. Why Kish? Why not Eridu, the city of beginnings? The answer, buried beneath centuries of clay, may lie in the geography of survival. After the deluge, the fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia were devastated. The marshlands where Eridu once stood had turned to salt flats and ruins. But further north, near the Tigris and Euphrates junction, Kish sat upon higher ground. It was here, perhaps, that the survivors gathered, the descendants of Ziusudra, rebuilding under the watchful eyes of gods who now kept their distance. In the myths, Kish was founded by Enmenluana and later ruled by Etana, the shepherd who ascended to heaven. The phrase, descended from heaven, was now replaced by its mirror, ascension. It's as if humanity, once governed by descending gods, was now reaching upward, seeking to reclaim what it had lost. Archaeological evidence supports the emergence of Kish as one of the earliest post-flood power centers. Excavations in modern-day Tel al-Uhaymir reveal layers of settlement dating back to around 3100 BCE, right at the dawn of the early dynastic period. Pottery, tools, and temple foundations tell the story of a civilization suddenly reborn, almost as if someone, or something, had reintroduced the blueprints of urban life. The Sumerians themselves said that the gods gave them these blueprints, known as the Mi, divine decrees that contained the patterns of civilization, kingship, law, crafts, wisdom, music, even warfare. After the flood, Enki once again bestowed the Mi upon humankind, restoring the sacred order that had been lost beneath the waves. But this time, the world was different. Before the flood, kings had ruled for tens of thousands of years. After, their reigns grew shorter, their power more human. The divine presence had dimmed, leaving behind a trace of its light, but not its eternity. It was as though heaven had withdrawn, leaving humanity to continue the experiment on its own. Still, in those early centuries, remnants of divine contact persisted. The kings of Kish claimed to rule by the staff of Anu and Enlil, the celestial authority of the sky gods. Their temples were aligned to the stars, their rituals synchronized with the equinoxes and solstices, maintaining a cosmic harmony that had once been natural but now required deliberate effort. The divine was no longer with them. It had to be invoked. And yet, even as kingship returned, something felt broken. The old world, the one ruled by Alulim and the Anunnaki, was remembered in hymns as a paradise that could never be restored. The gods had changed. Enlil, once a benefactor, became wrathful. Enki, once a savior, now worked in secrecy. The relationship between heaven and earth grew complicated, part partnership, part punishment. From this tension arose the very foundation of human civilization. For when divine order withdrew, mankind began to imitate it. We built cities to mirror the heavens, ziggurats to reach the stars, and laws to replace divine command. We became, in essence, the echoes of the gods. Kish was the first of these echoes, a prototype of the post-flood world. From its kings would emerge the rulers of Uruk, Ur, and Lagash. Each city would claim to be the new center of divine authority, and the gods themselves would take sides. The unity of Eridu was gone. Now began the age of competition, conquest, and ambition. It's here, in the ashes of the flood, that history truly begins. Because before there had been only mythic time, an era of gods and symbols. After the flood, time became linear. Kings had beginnings and ends. Dynasties rose and fell. Humanity, for the first time, became responsible for its own destiny. Still, the Sumerians never forgot. Their priests continued to recite the names of the antediluvian kings during temple rites, ensuring that their memory survived even as centuries passed. To forget the ancient rulers was to break the chain of divine descent. To remember them was to keep alive the whisper that kingship, and perhaps civilization itself, did not originate on Earth. In this way, the King List became more than a record. It became a bridge, a sacred map linking mortal history to divine memory. But there is a riddle hidden within its structure. After the flood, the King List records not only the rulers of Kish, but a sequence of dynasties moving from city to city: Uruk, Ur, Awan, Hamazi, Mari, each claiming kingship as if it were a relic passed from one guardian to another. Why? What did the Sumerians mean when they said kingship was taken to Kish, then carried to Uruk, and so on? Was kingship a physical object, a tablet, a crown, a stone, or was it something more abstract, like a fragment of divine energy that could only dwell in one city at a time? Whatever it was, the King List treats kingship like a living entity, something that could descend, depart, and move, and wherever it went, civilization blossomed. So if kingship truly came from heaven, perhaps it was not just authority that descended, it was knowledge itself, the knowledge of how to build, rule, and remember, the knowledge that would shape the next great empire of the ancient world. Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh. Uruk, the city that remembered heaven. In the heart of Mesopotamia, where the rivers Euphrates and Tigris braided through endless plains, a city rose that would redefine what it meant to be human. Its name was Uruk, and to the Sumerians, it was the city that remembered what heaven once was. After the flood, when kingship descended from heaven for the second time, it was said that divine authority passed through Kish and eventually found its home in Uruk. Here, the world began to dream again. Clay tablets from the 3rd millennium BCE describe Uruk as the shining city, the place of the Sacred Heart, and the home of Inanna, goddess of love and war. But to those who looked deeper, Uruk was more than a city. It was an attempt to rebuild paradise. Imagine it. Ziggurats climbing toward the clouds, white stone temples gleaming in the desert sun, and walls so immense that they became legend themselves. According to the Epic of Gilgamesh, those walls stretched for 6 miles, and their foundations were laid by the 7 sages, the same mysterious figures who, according to Mesopotamian lore, had survived the flood to bring wisdom back to humankind. Who were these sages? The Apkallu. Ancient carvings depict them as beings with human bodies and the heads or wings of eagles, holding small, mysterious objects that looked like pine cones or crystalline seeds. Some interpret these figures as mythic guardians, others as the last surviving representatives of the Anunnaki, the divine messengers who carried the blueprint of civilization through the flood and delivered it once more to the reborn world. Uruk, then, was not built by accident. It was engineered as remembrance, a terrestrial reflection of celestial order. Its architecture followed cosmic geometry, temples aligned with solstices, canals flowing according to star maps, and shrines dedicated to gods who represented the planets and constellations. The city itself was a sacred machine, a mirror of heaven on earth. But there was something different about this new age. In Eridu, kingship had been divine. In Kish, it was restoration. In Uruk, it became ambition. Humanity no longer waited for the gods to descend. It sought to reach them. And no figure embodies that transformation more than Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king of Uruk. His story, part myth, part history, marks the moment when humankind began to question the nature of mortality. Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, ruled with unmatched power. Yet despite his might, he was haunted by one truth, that he would someday die. His epic journey to find immortality was, in essence, a mirror of his city's own mission, to bridge the gap between heaven and earth once again. It's no coincidence that the Epic of Gilgamesh is considered the first recorded literary masterpiece. It's the moment humanity began to write not just about kings and gods, but about itself. Through Gilgamesh, Uruk became the voice of post-flood civilization, the world learning to live without the immediate presence of its creators. Still, the shadows of the Anunnaki lingered. Temple hymns from Uruk speak of the bright ones of old who descended before the time of the flood and taught the secrets of the heavens. Priests of Inanna invoked these figures in ritual, claiming that their wisdom was the light that guided Uruk's destiny. Even as the gods grew distant, the memory of their descent remained embedded in every brick and hymn. Archaeologically, Uruk's sudden emergence around 4000 BCE is one of history's greatest enigmas. No slow evolution led to its complexity. It simply appeared. Overnight, there were advanced systems of writing, administration, trade, and religious architecture. Scholars call this the Uruk phenomenon, the moment civilization itself erupted like a spark. But what ignited it? How could a culture leap from simple village life to monumental cities in a single era? Perhaps the Sumerians were right. Perhaps kingship, and the knowledge that came with it, really did descend again. In this period, writing first appears, the earliest cuneiform tablets, recording temple inventories, grain storage, and trade. Yet hidden within these mundane records is something profound, the shift from mythic memory to human history. Writing itself was the embodiment of the same divine act that had once granted kingship, the translation of divine thought into mortal form. Uruk was not just a city, it was humanity's memory made visible. Every wall, every ritual, every symbol was a way to keep alive the echo of the world before the flood. The gods might no longer walk among men, but their shadow guided the hand of every builder, every scribe, every priest. And yet, as Uruk grew, so too did humanity's confidence and its arrogance. The Sumerians began to believe that perhaps the divine order could be controlled, that mankind could command heaven through ritual, sacrifice, and power. The boundary between reverence and rebellion blurred. In this way, Uruk became both a triumph and a warning, a civilization that remembered heaven but also tried to imitate it too closely. It's the same tension that would echo through later myths: the Tower of Babel, the fall of Icarus, the quest for forbidden knowledge. For in every era, humanity seeks to rebuild what it once lost. Uruk was the first and greatest attempt to do so. But memory has a price, and the more mankind remembered the gods, the more it began to miss them. The Anunnaki legacy: gods, kings, and the blueprint of civilization. Before kings ruled men, gods ruled kings. And before the first brick of Eridu or Uruk was laid, the Sumerians said there existed a divine assembly, a celestial council that shaped the world, commanded the elements, and defined the laws of heaven and earth. They were called the Anunnaki, those who came down from the heavens. But what does that phrase truly mean? In Sumerian, Anu means sky or heaven, and Naki is derived from earth. Thus, Anunnaki literally translates to those of royal blood who from heaven to earth came. To the Sumerians, they were not abstract deities. They were beings, radiant and eternal, who walked among humanity in the first time, teaching art, agriculture, medicine, and cosmic law. These were not gods to be worshipped from afar. They were mentors, judges, and architects of order. The King List, in essence, is their record, the ledger of their influence on earth through their chosen human emissaries, the kings. At the head of this divine assembly stood Anu, the supreme father of the heavens. He was the distant star that governed fate, but rarely descended to earth. Beneath him was Enlil, lord of air and command, who shaped destiny and decreed the fates of nations. Then came Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and creation, he who gave kingship to Eridu, who saved Ziusudra from the flood, who whispered knowledge into the hearts of men. And among them was Inanna, later known as Ishtar, goddess of love, war, and transformation. In her we find the dual nature of divine influence, creation and destruction intertwined. She was both nurturer and storm, the embodiment of what happens when divine energy enters the realm of human desire. To understand the Anunnaki is to understand the architecture of civilization itself. They were not just gods, they were archetypes, expressions of natural and moral forces personified as celestial intelligences. Anu represented authority, Enlil law, Enki wisdom, Inanna passion, Ninhursag fertility, Utu justice, and Nana the cycles of time. Together they formed the cosmic government that mirrored the social hierarchy they taught to mankind. It's no coincidence that the earliest Sumerian cities were organized like the heavens themselves, each devoted to a different god, each ruled by a king who acted as intermediary. Was dedicated to Nana, the moon god, Lagash to Ningirsu, the warrior of Enlil, Eridu to Enki, Uruk to Inanna. This divine mapping created the first network of sacred cities, an earthly reflection of the celestial order. The Anunnaki were, in essence, the blueprints of governance, architecture, and morality. Their myths taught that civilization itself was a divine act, an imitation of heaven. But beneath this shining order lurked a deeper question. Were the Anunnaki truly immortal gods, or were they symbols of something older, something that once walked the earth in flesh and light? The Sumerians described them in startlingly physical terms. They shone like copper, their voices thundered like storms, and their glory blinded mortals who beheld them. When Enlil's chariot passed through the sky, the earth trembled. When Inanna descended from heaven, her radiance covered the lands. These descriptions sound less like metaphors and more like attempts to describe technological or celestial phenomena in the language of the ancient world. But in our story, the Anunnaki are not aliens or astronauts. They are the divine memory of creation itself. Each figure represents a stage in humanity's awakening, a fragment of consciousness passed from the cosmic to the human. To the Sumerians, the Anunnaki didn't just build temples, they built meaning, and yet their relationship with humanity was never simple. The myths tell of disagreements among the gods, Enlil desiring to limit mankind's power, Enki seeking to uplift it. When the flood came, it was Enlil's decree to destroy, and Enki's rebellion to preserve. From this divine conflict, humanity inherited its own dual nature, obedience and defiance, order and curiosity. Even the very structure of the King List mirrors this celestial drama. Each dynasty, each shift in power, corresponds to a mythic conflict among the gods. When kingship moves from Eridu to Kish, from Kish to Uruk, it reflects not just human succession, but divine transfer. The gods were passing their authority, one to another, through their chosen vessels. It is as if the Sumerians saw human history as a shadow play of divine politics. Every war, every flood, every dynasty was an echo of heavenly disputes. And if that's true, then the King List is not a simple record of human kings. It is a coded chronicle of divine intervention. Across time, these patterns persisted. The Egyptian pantheon mirrored the same structure: Ra, sky; Shu, air; Thoth, wisdom; Isis, fertility; Horus, kingship. In India, the Devas governed through the same celestial council. Even in the Bible, the idea of a heavenly host and a divine hierarchy reflects this ancient Sumerian pattern. Perhaps this is no coincidence. Perhaps what the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, later ages would call angels, devas, or gods. Different names, same archetypal truth. The universe is alive and its intelligence seeks reflection in humanity. If kingship is the gift of heaven, then civilization itself is the echo of divine consciousness, a legacy that began with the Anunnaki and continues in every act of creation we perform. But the Sumerians also left a warning, for when humanity begins to see itself as divine, the balance shifts. The line between imitation and arrogance blurs, and from that tension would emerge the greatest of all Sumerian kings, one who would seek to challenge even the gods themselves. His name was Gilgamesh, the king who challenged heaven. In the heart of Uruk, behind walls so vast They seemed to hold back the chaos of the world. There ruled a king unlike any other. His name was Gilgamesh, and the Sumerians said he was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. He was the son of Lugalbanda, a mortal ruler, and Ninsun, a goddess of wisdom and dream. Born between heaven and earth, Gilgamesh embodied the very tension of post-flood humanity, the pull between the divine that created us and the mortality that confines us. The Epic of Gilgamesh opens not with his glory, but with his tyranny. He is described as a king who ruled Uruk with unrelenting strength, claiming the right to all within his city, both sacred and profane. His people prayed to the gods for relief, and the Anunnaki answered not with punishment, but with reflection. They sent him a companion, Enkidu, the wild man. Enkidu was the mirror of Gilgamesh, a creature born of clay, untouched by civilization, roaming with the beasts. When he is brought to Uruk, tamed by love and transformed by knowledge, the two men meet not as enemies, but as halves of a whole. Their friendship marks the birth of something new in the human story: empathy, the union of power and innocence, civilization and nature. Together, Gilgamesh and Enkidu embark on heroic quests, slaying the giant Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest, defeating the bull of heaven sent by Inanna, and standing before the gods themselves. But beneath these adventures lies something deeper, a spiritual allegory. The monsters they face are not just beasts, they are symbols of the old world, the remnants of divine boundaries humanity was never meant to cross. When Gilgamesh kills the bull of heaven, it is not simply an act of defiance, it is humanity's declaration of independence from the gods. For the first time, man has slain what came from the stars. And yet, victory brings tragedy. The gods decree that one of the two must die for their hubris. Enkidu, the innocent, falls ill. In his final moments, he curses the gates of Uruk, the temple prostitutes, the gods who made him, and finally himself. When he dies, Gilgamesh's arrogance collapses. He weeps over his friend's body for 7 days, until a worm falls from his nose. It is the first time in literature that humanity confronts mortality face to face. The death of Enkidu breaks the king's heart, but awakens his soul. In his grief, Gilgamesh realizes the terrible truth. Even a man 2/3 divine must die. So he sets out on a journey that no mortal had ever dared to take, into the distant world beyond the seas, in search of eternal life. His path leads him through mountains guarded by scorpion men, through the darkness where the sun sleeps, and across the waters of death. At last, he reaches Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the great flood, the man who once was Ziusudra. Here, the circle closes. The first king of the post-flood world stands before the last survivor of the world that came before it. Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh the story of the deluge, of the gods' decision to destroy humanity, and of Enki's secret warning that saved a single family. But when Gilgamesh asks for the secret of immortality, Utnapishtim shakes his head. There is no permanence, he says. Do we build houses forever? Do contracts last for all time? Only the gods live forever beneath the sun. Still, out of compassion, Utnapishtim reveals a secret, a plant that restores youth, hidden deep beneath the waters. Gilgamesh dives into the abyss and retrieves it, hope reborn in his hands. But as he rests on his journey home, a serpent steals the plant, and with it, the dream of immortality is gone. In that moment, the serpent becomes the symbol of eternity denied, the endless cycle of life, death, and renewal that humanity can never escape. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, empty-handed, yet transformed. He looks upon the walls of his city, the same walls we saw at the beginning, and smiles. He realizes that immortality was never in the body. It was in memory, in creation, in the written word. The gods had not denied him. They had guided him toward understanding. Gilgamesh's journey is not just the story of a man seeking eternal life. It is the allegory of civilization itself. Humanity, born of the divine yet bound by mortality, spends eternity trying to reclaim the wisdom of its creators. Every temple, every story, every act of creation is our echo of that quest. And in this sense, Gilgamesh did become immortal, not through the plant of life, but through the power of story. His name carved in clay, still spoken 5,000 years later. He became what the Sumerians always believed kingship could achieve, the bridge between heaven and earth. But even in this triumph, something lingers. Because if Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood, truly lived forever, then perhaps the divine world did not disappear entirely. Perhaps the line between gods and men was not broken, merely hidden, waiting for the next awakening. And somewhere beyond the walls of Uruk, that ancient knowledge still waited to be found. Secrets of the Apkallu, the sages of the deep. Long before philosophers spoke of Atlantis, before priests whispered the name Hermes Trismegistus, there were the Apkallu, the seven sages of Mesopotamian legend. They are mentioned only in fragments, buried within hymns and rituals, yet their presence hovers like a ghost over every Sumerian city. If the Anunnaki were the architects of creation, the Apkallu were its custodians, the bearers of divine wisdom in a post-flood world. The texts describe them as men of fish, or fish-cloaked sages. Their images appear on cylinder seals and temple carvings, human figures draped in the skin of fish, carrying strange tools or seeds, sometimes half bird, half human, always radiant with sacred knowledge. Their role was simple, yet cosmic, to guide humanity back toward divine order after the deluge had erased everything. The Bit Mesari tablets, ritual texts used by Assyrian exorcists, describe them as the purifiers of humanity, the ones who ascended from the deep. Their leader was Adapa, the first sage, created by Enki himself. To understand Adapa is to peer into the very heart of the Sumerian mystery, the moment when divine wisdom entered human form. According to the myth, Adapa was born in Eridu, the city of the first kings. He was not a god, but neither was he entirely human. Enki, the god of wisdom, endowed him with vast understanding, language, mathematics, medicine, and the secrets of ritual. He taught him to calm the winds and command the waters of the Abzu. Adapa became the first priest, the first scholar, the first to mediate between the seen and the unseen. But when the south wind rose against him, Adapa broke its wing, a symbolic act of defiance against the heavens. For this, he was summoned before Anu, the great sky god. There, the myth takes a haunting turn. Anu, moved by Adapa's brilliance, offered him the bread and water of eternal life. Yet Enki, fearing that humanity was not ready for immortality, warned Adapa not to partake. Obedient to his creator, Adapa refused, and so lost the chance to live forever. It is a scene that echoes across cultures. A man created by divine hands, given the choice between knowledge and immortality, choosing wisdom and losing eternity. It is the same paradox that defines humanity itself, and it is why the Apkallu became the sacred teachers of men, not gods. They carried divine knowledge but bore the weight of mortality. In later Babylonian accounts, the Apkallu were said to have risen from the sea, each bringing a specific gift: agriculture, architecture, sacred song, astronomy, kingship. Their arrival was not chaotic but ordered, following the rebuilding of civilization after the flood. To the Sumerians, they were the living proof that the connection between heaven and earth had not been broken. It had merely gone underwater. When archaeologists uncovered reliefs from Nimrud and Nineveh, they found carvings of these fish-cloaked sages standing beside stylized tree-of-life motifs, holding pine cone-shaped objects toward it. What were they doing? Some interpret it as a purification ritual, the pine cone symbolizing the seed of divine life. Others see it as something far older, a memory of genetic or energetic transmission, the passing of sacred essence from gods to men. Yet, even stripped of speculation, the imagery speaks volumes. The Apkallu were always shown in the act of transference, imparting something unseen, sacred, and necessary for creation to continue. They were, in every sense, the guardians of continuity. And perhaps that's why their number, 7, appears again and again in mythologies across the world. 7 sages in Sumer, 7 rishis in India, 7 builders in Egypt, 7 wise men in Greece. Could this repetition be coincidence? Or was it a shared memory, an echo of the same original brotherhood of teachers who carried the torch of civilization after every cataclysm? The Sumerians believed the Apkallu came from the Abzu, the subterranean sea beneath the earth where Enki dwelled. But what if the deep was not a physical ocean, but a symbol for the abyss of prehistory, the time before memory, before writing? From that darkness, these sages emerged like lighthouses, each carrying fragments of a forgotten science that allowed humanity to begin again. In this way, the Apkallu bridge 2 worlds, myth and archaeology, heaven and history. They stand between the divine architects, the Anunnaki, and their human successors, the kings of the Second Age. They are the continuity of wisdom between worlds lost and worlds reborn. And if we listen carefully, their presence is still felt. The priestly traditions of Sumer, Egypt, and even early Israel all trace their roots to ancient wisdom bearers who came from the sea or the stars. Every temple school, every mystery rite, every sacred text echoes their methods: hidden geometry, coded numbers, ritual purification, the idea that knowledge is salvation. The Apkallu didn't just rebuild civilization, they rebuilt memory itself. But there is a darker side to their legend. For some texts speak not of 7 sages, but of 7 fallen ones, those who broke the covenant of heaven and shared forbidden secrets with humankind. In later traditions, they became the Watchers, the Nephilim, the fallen angels. The story had shifted, but its roots were the same: divine beings who taught too much. What, then, was the true sin of the Apkallu? Was it hubris or compassion? Did they fall because they disobeyed divine law, or because they pitied the creatures struggling in darkness after the flood? The Sumerian tablets never say. They leave us with silence, and with the haunting image of a figure half human, half fish, stepping from the waves at dawn, carrying a seed of light in his hand. That seed, they said, was the wisdom of the gods, and its roots still grow beneath the ruins of Mesopotamia. The hidden knowledge, the me, the tablets, and the language of the gods. In the heart of Sumerian myth, there lies a mystery older than writing itself, a word so small and elusive that its meaning seems to shift like light through water. Me. Not me, as in the self, but me, a sacred syllable that carried the weight of heaven's architecture. The me were said to be the divine decrees, the cosmic blueprints that shaped the structure of civilization, morality, and even existence itself. Each me represented a force, a principle, an archetype, a fragment of divine law that governed not only how humanity should live, but how reality itself should function. According to the myth of Inanna and Enki, the goddess of Uruk once journeyed to the city of Eridu, the home of Enki, god of wisdom and keeper of the Abzu. There, within his temple, the Abzu, house of the deep, Enki kept the me, sealed within sacred tablets of lapis lazuli. When Inanna arrived, she offered Enki wine, flattery, and conversation. The god, drunk on his own delight, agreed to give her the me, all of them. As dawn rose over the Abzu, Inanna fled back toward Uruk with the sacred decrees in her boat of heaven. When Enki sobered, he realized what he had done and sent his servants, the Gala spirits, to retrieve them, but they failed. Inanna reached Uruk safely, and there she established the me within her temples. The text ends with Enki smiling and blessing her, as though even he understood that divine wisdom must now belong to humanity. The myth is not about theft, it is about transfer. It describes, in poetic form, the moment when divine knowledge left the hands of the gods and entered human civilization. The me were not objects, but codes, vibrations of sacred order. When Inanna carried them to Uruk, she was not stealing secrets. She was bringing light into time. The tablets describe the me in staggering variety. There is the me of kingship, the me of truth, the me of song, of art, of war, of love. There are me for cities, for priesthoods, for weaving, for law, for joy, for deceit, even for destruction. The divine world, the Sumerians believed, was not static. It was an intricate system of harmonies, and each me was a note in the symphony of creation. In this sense, the me were the genetic code of civilization, spiritual DNA encoded into human culture, and like all DNA, they could be replicated, combined, or corrupted. It's here that another Sumerian artifact enters the story, the Tablets of Destiny. These tablets, unlike the me, governed not the structure of creation, but the direction of fate. Whoever held them, the myths say, had control over the universe itself. Even the gods feared their loss, for to possess the Tablets of Destiny was to command reality, to speak and make it so. In one myth, the demon bird Anzu steals the tablets from Enlil's sanctuary, plunging the cosmos into chaos until they are recovered. In another, the tablets pass to Ninurta, the heroic son of Enlil, who restores order and reestablishes divine rule. These stories echo a central Sumerian truth. Knowledge is power, and power without order is destruction. What are these tablets really? To the ancients, they were physical, engraved with cuneiform symbols and guarded in temples. But metaphysically, they represented the power of language itself, the word as creation. The Sumerians believed writing was not invented by man, but revealed by the gods. Each sign was more than a mark. It was a vibration of divine intention, a living force. To write was to participate in creation. The word itself, cuneiform, means wedge-shaped, yet in its earliest form, it was not purely linguistic. It was pictographic, geometric, harmonic. The symbols of the earliest tablets correspond to rhythms and ratios, the same mathematical relationships that govern sound, stars, and architecture. To inscribe these was to channel the same intelligence that the Anunnaki used to shape the cosmos. In other words, language was sacred technology. To the Sumerians, every word had resonance. Every sign had power. Speech, writing, and ritual were not separate. They were the same act, the me expressed through sound and form. And perhaps this is the deepest meaning of the me, that civilization is not built from stone and clay, but from patterns, vibrations encoded through time. Every temple, every song, every law is a manifestation of the divine word that once descended from the heavens. It's easy to see how this idea echoed through later ages. The Egyptian concept of ma'at, order, truth, harmony, mirrors the me. The Hebrew notion of logos, the word through which all things were made, resonates with it. Even the Greek myths of Prometheus stealing fire or Hermes gifting language are echoes of Inanna's journey from Eridu to Uruk. Perhaps the me were never lost at all. Perhaps they simply changed form, hidden in the structures of music, mathematics, and myth that still govern our world. If that's true, then the sacred language of the gods was not destroyed by time. It was absorbed by humanity, whispered in prayer, sung in ritual, written in code, and somewhere, deep beneath the ruins of ancient Sumer, in the silence of old temples and broken clay, the memory of that language still vibrates. Because when the Sumerians wrote that the kingship descended from heaven, they may have meant something far greater than rule or authority. They may have meant that language itself, the power to name, to order, to create, descended from heaven too. The gods gave us the word, and through the word we became gods of our own world, the astronomers of heaven, mapping the divine clock. When the Sumerians lifted their eyes to the night sky, they did not see emptiness. They saw order, a living architecture of light, precise, mathematical, eternal. Each star, each wandering planet, was not a mere point of fire, but a divine signature. The heavens were a mirror of the gods, and to understand them was to understand the divine plan itself. For the Sumerians, astronomy was not science. It was theology in motion. They called the sky An, the dwelling place of the supreme God, and they believed that every shift in the heavens corresponded to events upon the earth. This was the doctrine of correspondence, the belief that heaven and earth were reflections of one another, linked through invisible laws. It was this doctrine that allowed them to create the first calendars, the first systems of geometry, and the first attempts to measure time itself. At the core of this cosmic science was the number 60, the sacred unit of the Sumerian mathematical system. Why 60? Because it was divisible by the most fundamental numbers, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. To the Sumerians, this harmony made it divine. Time itself was shaped by it. 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 360 degrees in a circle. Even today, every clock on Earth still ticks to the rhythm of ancient Sumer. But the Sumerians went far beyond simple measurement. They observed the heavens for thousands of years, recording the paths of the moon, the sun, and the 5 visible planets. They noticed that these celestial bodies moved in repeating cycles, patterns of return, reflection, and resonance. In their tablets, they called them the Wanderers, or Ilumesh, the Shining Ones. Later ages would call them by other names, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, but to the Sumerians, they were divine powers, each corresponding to one of the Anunnaki. Nana, the moon, ruled the night and measured time. Utu, the sun, brought justice and light. Inanna, bright Venus, symbolized love, fertility, and war. Nergal, Mars, embodied destruction and disease. Marduk, or Enlil, associated with Jupiter, represented kingship and cosmic authority. Ninurta, linked to Saturn, governed agriculture and order. Each movement, each conjunction, each eclipse was a message, a divine syllable in the language of heaven. The priests of Sumer learned to read these signs, not as astronomers, but as interpreters of divine rhythm. They built observatories atop ziggurats, high towers that reached toward the stars. There, they charted celestial movements with astonishing accuracy, using clay tablets to record positions centuries before any known civilization had conceived such precision. From these observations emerged the first zodiac, a band of 12 constellations through which the sun and planets moved, marking the passage of time and the turning of cosmic ages. But to the Sumerians, these were not constellations. They were divine stations, each representing a segment of the celestial kingdom. The zodiac, or path of Anu, was the heavenly version of the Sumerian King List. As kingship passed from city to city on Earth, it passed from constellation to constellation in the sky. The cosmos itself was a kingdom, and its rulers changed in cycles measured not by human years, but by the movement of stars. Modern astronomers have discovered that one complete precessional cycle, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, takes roughly 25,120 years. The Sumerians spoke of vast reigns, 36,000 years, 28,800 years, 43,200 years. Different numbers, yet the same magnitude. It is as if they encoded the motions of the heavens into the lifespans of their divine kings. Perhaps the King List was not only a chronicle of time past, but a map of cosmic time, written in reigns rather than rotations. This cosmic connection shaped everything the Sumerians built. Temples were aligned to the rising of certain stars, festivals synchronized to solstices and equinoxes. Even their myths mirrored celestial events. When Inanna descended to the underworld, the planet Venus disappeared from the dawn sky. When she returned, Venus rose again, shimmering at twilight, the resurrection of the goddess in the heavens. The priests of Sumer were not only guardians of ritual, they were astronomer kings of the divine clock. Their role was to ensure that the rhythm of human life remained in harmony with the cycles of the cosmos. When floods, droughts, or eclipses broke this rhythm, it was believed that the bond between heaven and earth had been disturbed and must be restored through ceremony, sacrifice, or recalibration of the calendar. Even the concept of destiny, Shimtu in Sumerian, was inseparable from the stars. Each soul, each city, each dynasty was said to have its own star of fate. To know one's place in the heavens was to know one's purpose on earth. But over time, this sacred astronomy became diluted. The priests turned their observations into predictions, then into omens, and finally into astrology. What began as communion with the divine order became commerce with uncertainty, yet the root truth remained. Humanity had once measured the rhythm of the gods, and that rhythm still beats. Every clock that turns, every calendar we follow, every observatory that peers into space, each is a faint reflection of that ancient temple atop a ziggurat, where a priest once raised his eyes to the stars and whispered the names of the Anunnaki. Because for the Sumerians, to look at the sky was not to gaze into the unknown. It was to remember, to see, in the turning of the heavens, the great wheel of kingship still descending, still circling, still keeping time with the pulse of creation. But as humanity grew bolder, its gaze began to shift from the heavens back to itself. And with that shift came something entirely new, a desire not only to understand the cosmos, but to control it. The Tower of Babel, humanity's second descent. For a brief, shining moment after the flood, heaven and earth moved in harmony. The kingship had returned, the me were restored, and the stars themselves seemed to guide human hands. But time has a way of eroding reverence. What begins as remembrance soon becomes ambition, and ambition, left unchecked, becomes defiance. The Sumerians told of an age when humankind, united under one tongue and one will, sought to reclaim the very height from which kingship had descended. Later generations would call it the Tower of Babel, but its true name may have been Anunnaki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. It rose in Babylon, the successor of Sumer, built of baked brick and bitumen, a ziggurat that scraped the belly of the sky. The story has been told and retold. Mankind, once scattered and humbled by the flood, now stood together again. They said, "Come, let us build a tower that reaches to heaven, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the earth." But what were they truly building? A monument of pride or a beacon to re-establish the link that had been lost? The priests of Babylon claimed the tower's summit was a portal to the divine, a place where the gods could descend and humans could ascend. Its architecture was not random. It followed the same cosmic blueprint encoded in the me. 7 stages, one for each planet, painted in the colors of the heavens: black for Saturn, white for Jupiter, red for Mars, blue for Venus, orange for Mercury, silver for the moon, and gold for the sun. It was, in essence, a stairway of the cosmos, a terrestrial reflection of the celestial ladder. But within that design lay a hidden danger. Humanity was no longer content to be the reflection of heaven. It wished to be its equal. The ancient texts speak of gods watching from above, debating what to do, not with wrath, but with sorrow. They saw that humankind, empowered by divine knowledge, had begun to use it without wisdom. The same tools that had once built harmony were now building hubris. In the biblical retelling, it is said that the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. He declared, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do." So he confused their language and scattered them across the earth. But perhaps this was not punishment, it was preservation, because when humanity spoke only one sacred language, it also shared one mind, one thought, one will. In their unity, they risked collapsing the boundary between mortal and divine, the very separation that made creation possible. By dividing the tongues, the gods ensured that no single people could again control the full vibration of the sacred word. It was, in a sense, the second descent, not of kingship, but of confusion. The divine word shattered into fragments, scattering across tribes and nations. Each culture retained a piece of it, a shard of the celestial language that once bound gods and men. And from those fragments arose the diversity of tongues, myths, and religions we know today. Yet if you listen carefully, you can still hear the resonance beneath them all. Across continents and millennia, words for God, sky, and light carry echoes of the same original sound, the ancient phonemes of Sumer, An, El, Al, Il, the syllables of divinity repeated like faint memories in the languages of the world. In this sense, the Tower of Babel was not destroyed. It was completed, just in a way no one expected. Its bricks scattered, its message dispersed, its spirit immortalized in the very speech of humankind. We became the tower, each person a living stone in a structure too vast to see. Archaeologically, Anunnaki was real. Its ruins still lie beneath modern-day Babylon, massive foundations of fired clay that once supported a ziggurat over 300 feet tall. Greek travelers described it as a mountain of the gods, a man-made imitation of cosmic order. When Alexander the Great conquered Babylon, he found the tower in ruins and ordered it rebuilt. But even the conqueror of worlds could not restore what time had taken. He died before the project began, another echo of mankind's inability to reach heaven. The myth of Babel marks a turning point in humanity's spiritual history. Before it, the gods were close, walking, speaking, teaching. After it, they became distant, transcendent, hidden behind clouds of language and interpretation. Heaven had not vanished. It had become silent. But silence is never empty. It is the space where memory echoes. For in every culture that arose after Babel, the same impulse re-emerged, to rebuild the connection. The Egyptians raised pyramids, the Mayans built stepped temples, the Hindus constructed cosmic mountains, the Greeks envisioned Olympus. All different tongues, all different gods, but all striving toward the same unseen summit. Perhaps the confusion of tongues was not a curse, but a design. For in that scattering, the divine spark was sown across the earth, ensuring that no one people would ever again claim sole ownership of heaven. Every culture, every religion, every language became a different verse in the same eternal hymn. The tower fell, but the longing that built it never did. And that longing, for unity, for the return of the divine, would shape the next great age of human civilization, the rise of empires, kingdoms that sought to restore cosmic order by uniting the scattered nations under a single crown. But in doing so, they would awaken the very shadow that had once drowned the world. The age of empires, kings who dreamed of heaven. When the dust of Babel settled, the divine voice grew distant, but humanity's desire for heaven did not fade. It transformed. No longer could men call upon the gods directly, so they began to imitate them. The era of divine kingship was over. Now began the age of empires, when kings no longer ruled for the gods, but as gods. It started with Akkad, the empire of Sargon the Great, a man whose legend begins like prophecy. Born an orphan, cast upon the river in a basket of reeds, and raised by the goddess Ishtar herself, Sargon claimed that his authority came not from bloodline, but from divine favor. He rose from cupbearer to conqueror, uniting the Sumerian city-states under a single rule around 2330 BCE. To his subjects, he was not merely a man, he was the earthly reflection of the heavenly king, Enlil. Sargon's empire marked a seismic shift in human history. For the first time, civilization became centralized. Language, law, and power woven together into a single system. The divine order that once descended from the heavens was now codified in clay tablets and royal decrees. He built temples to the gods of Sumer, yet carved his own image beside theirs. In this act, humanity crossed an invisible threshold. It began to create gods in its own likeness. The Akkadians inherited the myths of Sumer, but they retold them in their own tongue. The Anunnaki became the Igigi, the heavenly hosts. Enlil's authority became that of Il, the high god. Even the word Anu, heaven, transformed into An, El, and Al in later tongues, seeds of the divine syllable that would echo through Hebrew, Arabic, and countless languages after. Myth became law, and law became empire. Sargon's successors built upon his vision, but none embodied it more than his grandson, Naram Sin, the beloved of Sin. He declared himself god of Akkad, the first human in history to claim divinity while alive. His stele shows him wearing a horned crown, a symbol reserved for the gods themselves, crushing enemies beneath his feet as he ascends a mountain that pierces the sky. It is the image of Babel reborn, not as a tower, but as a man. For his arrogance, the scribes said, the gods punished him. The Gutians, a mountain people from the east, invaded and toppled the Akkadian Empire. The texts describe it not as political collapse, but as divine retribution. The great mountain of the east descended upon Akkad. Kingship was carried away. The gods turned their faces from the land. Once again, kingship descended elsewhere, this time to Ur, Isen, and Larsa. Each dynasty rose claiming to restore divine order, and each fell when its ruler overstepped the sacred boundary. The cycle of rise and ruin became the rhythm of Mesopotamia, a reflection of the cosmic pattern itself. It was during this time that the Code of Ur-Nammu and later the Code of Hammurabi were inscribed, laws carved in stone, declaring that justice flowed from the gods through the king to the people. Yet the more kings claimed divine authority, the further the gods seemed to withdraw. Religion became ritual, power became bureaucracy, the voice of Enki and Enlil was replaced by royal decrees and temple taxes. Humanity had mastered the form of heaven, but lost its essence. Still, the dream of unity persisted. Each empire that rose in Mesopotamia sought not merely land or wealth, but cosmic legitimacy. Every ruler wanted to prove that he was chosen, that kingship had descended once more, this time through him. When Hammurabi of Babylon rose to power around 1792 BCE, he revived that ancient vision. In his prologue, he claims that Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon, granted him kingship to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land. Marduk himself was a reinterpretation of the old gods, a fusion of Enlil's authority and Enki's wisdom. Through Marduk, the Babylonians rewrote heaven's hierarchy, placing their own city at the center of the cosmos. It is here that myth and empire fused completely. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, describes how Marduk defeats the primordial dragon Tiamat and establishes order from chaos. The story is more than mythology, it is political theology. Marduk's victory justified Babylon's rule just as Hammurabi's laws justified his kingship. The message was clear. Divine order now resided in Babylon. And so, once again, humanity had built its tower, this time not from brick, but from empire. Babylon became the new Axis Mundi, the gate of the gods. Its ziggurats mirrored the heavens, its priests charted the stars, and its kings wrote their laws in stone as though they were spoken by the gods themselves. It was the fulfillment and the repetition of Sumer's oldest dream. But in every repetition lies a warning. The cycle that began in Eridu, the descent of kingship, the rise of arrogance, the fall into chaos, was repeating itself on a grander scale. Empires grew like towers, gods became symbols, kings became idols. The divine pattern had not been broken. It had become human history itself. And as history turned, a new kind of darkness began to creep in. The sacred balance between heaven and earth was breaking. The gods, once present in temple and sky, began to fade from the world. And into that silence stepped something new, prophecy. Because when the voice of the gods grows distant, humanity begins to hear echoes in its own soul, prophets and shadows, when the gods fell silent. The gods once spoke through wind and water, through kings and oracles, through flame and star. But as the empires of Mesopotamia grew heavy with ritual and law, something began to change. The divine voices that had once guided humanity grew faint, distant echoes fading beneath the weight of bureaucracy, conquest, and fear. By the first millennium BCE, the temples still stood, their ziggurats still touched the sky, and priests still recited the hymns of the Anunnaki. Yet the presence that had once filled those sacred halls was gone. The sacred had become ceremony, the mystery habit. The gods no longer descended from heaven. They were invoked by name, but not by presence. And yet, in that silence, a new kind of voice emerged. It began not with kings or priests, but with prophets, men and women who claimed to hear what others could not. In the stillness of divine withdrawal, they heard the faint resonance that lingered between worlds. These were not rulers. They were messengers of the unseen, intermediaries between a fading pantheon and a rising humanity. They did not descend from heaven. They listened for it. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Canaan, this new phenomenon spread like fire beneath ash. Where once the gods commanded, now the heavens whispered. Where once kings received laws on tablets, now solitary voices proclaimed visions of judgment, justice, and renewal. The authority of the divine was shifting from the ziggurat to the human soul. It was as if the heavens, once external, were turning inward. The Sumerians had said that kingship descended from heaven, but in the age of prophets, heaven descended into consciousness. No longer a visible throne in the sky, it became an invisible kingdom within. In Babylon, where the ziggurat still stood, prophets began to see visions of a cosmic reckoning. In the clay tablets of the Chaldeans, astronomers began to predict not only the motions of the stars, but the fates of nations. Each eclipse, each comet, each planetary conjunction was read as an omen, a sign that the gods were speaking again, but in a new language, the language of symbol. At the same time, in nearby lands, something remarkable was unfolding. In the deserts of Canaan and the highlands of Judah, new prophets arose, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, each echoing the imagery of the ancient Sumerians without even realizing it. Chariots of fire in the sky, wheels within wheels, beings of light with the faces of lions, eagles, and men. It was as if the visions of the Anunnaki had returned, but now through human imagination, not divine visitation. The story of Daniel in Babylon captures this transformation perfectly. Taken captive to the heart of the empire that once worshipped Marduk, Daniel becomes a seer of dreams and omens, interpreting the will of heaven for mortal kings. He stands in the same place the old priest astronomers once stood, but his authority no longer comes from ritual. It comes from revelation. He listens to the same sky the Sumerians charted, but now it speaks in metaphors, not mathematics. This transition from divine presence to prophetic vision marks one of the most profound shifts in human spiritual history. The gods were retreating, but not abandoning. They were moving inward into the realm of dream, vision, and conscience. Humanity was being invited to become the new interpreter of the cosmos. And yet, this awakening came with shadow. For every true prophet, there were those who sought to claim heaven's voice for power. The same imperial ambitions that once built empires of brick now built empires of belief. Kings became chosen by God. Priests declared wars in the name of the divine. The sacred language that once united heaven and earth began to fracture into theology, dogma, and division. What the Sumerians had encoded as cycles of descent and ascent, the rhythm of divine order, was now reinterpreted as linear destiny, beginnings, endings, apocalypse. The eternal spiral became a straight line pointing toward salvation or destruction. The prophets of the New World spoke of a coming judgment, a time when the gods, or God, would return to set right what humanity had broken. But beneath their warnings lay a deeper truth, one that the Sumerians had known since Eridu, that destruction is never final, and that every flood, every fall, every silence is followed by rebirth. Perhaps the gods had not fallen silent at all. Perhaps they were teaching humanity to listen differently, to hear divinity not in thunder, but in thought, not in decree, but in dream. Across the ancient world, this new sensitivity began to pulse through culture. Poets spoke of muses, philosophers of divine reason, mystics of inner light. The sacred had turned inward, waiting to be rediscovered. And when humanity was finally ready to hear it again, it would no longer sound like the voice of the Anunnaki. It would sound like the voice of consciousness itself. But before that awakening could come, the ancient world still had one last empire to rise, one final attempt to rebuild the universal order under a single banner, an empire that would call itself eternal. Babylon, the eternal, the empire that refused to die. Long after Sumer's cities had crumbled into sand, one name still echoed like a heartbeat across the Mesopotamian plain: Babylon. To the ancients, it was not merely a city, it was the very center of the world, the navel of creation. They called it Babilu, gate of the gods, and within its walls, the dream of heaven on earth was reborn. Babylon emerged from the ashes of Akkad and Ur as a phoenix of divine ambition. By the time of Hammurabi, it had become the seat of cosmic law, but under later kings like Nebuchadnezzar II, it transcended history itself. It became myth incarnate, a kingdom that claimed to unite heaven's order with human mastery. The ziggurat of Anunnaki, the fabled Tower of Babel, rose once more, this time fully realized, its peak gilded in gold, reflecting the sun as if to blind the gods themselves. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was no ordinary city. Her walls stretched for miles, triple-layered and towering. Her gates gleamed with blue-glazed brick and golden bulls. The Ishtar Gate, still preserved in modern museums, bears witness to an age that believed stone and color could capture eternity. The air was thick with incense and music. Processions of priests carried statues of gods through marble courtyards, while astronomers recorded the heavens above. It was said that within Babylon, every god of Mesopotamia found a home, as if the city itself had become a microcosm of the divine realm. But beneath the splendor lay something else, an ache, a defiance, a yearning to reclaim what had been lost since the days of Eridu and Uruk. For the kings of Babylon knew their history. They studied the tablets of Sumer, the King List, the the stories of the flood and the descent of kingship. They believed Babylon was not a continuation of Sumer, but its resurrection. Nebuchadnezzar himself declared, "I have made Babylon the bond between heaven and earth, the dwelling of the supreme gods." To him, rebuilding Anunnaki was not an act of pride. It was a sacred duty. He saw himself as the restorer of the cosmic ladder, the keeper of the divine flame. But the gods no longer walked the earth, and what once descended from heaven could now only be imitated. The rituals continued. The sacrifices burned. The stars were measured, but the voice of the divine remained silent. And in that silence, Babylon turned inward upon itself. What began as reverence became obsession. The empire's architects sought perfection, not of spirit, but of structure. Monuments that would defy decay, gardens that would mimic paradise. The Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, were said to have been built by Nebuchadnezzar for his queen, who longed for the green hills of her homeland. Terraces rose like steps toward heaven, filled with palm trees, myrtle, and jasmine. Water flowed upward through hidden pumps, defying gravity. In these gardens, humanity had indeed mastered creation, but at what cost? For every paradise built by human hands is, in some way, an echo of what was lost. To the Hebrew prophets living in exile within Babylon's walls, the city became a symbol of both awe and horror, a vision of what happens when divine order is replaced by human ambition. They called it the Whore of Nations, a city of gold and sin, destined for judgment. But even in their condemnation, they could not deny Babylon's power. For in its libraries, astronomers charted the heavens with precision unseen before. In its temples, scribes preserved the myths and mathematics of Sumer. In its schools, the very foundations of Western civilization were laid. Babylon became both the keeper and the corrupter of the ancient wisdom. Its priests still invoked Marduk, the god who had conquered Tiamat and created the world. But over centuries, Marduk himself changed. From a divine being to a symbol of empire, the embodiment of man's desire to rule as gods once did. When the Persians under Cyrus the Great entered Babylon in 539 BCE, they did so without battle. The city's gates opened as if by fate. Cyrus declared himself chosen by Marduk, continuing the tradition of divine kingship even as he dissolved Babylon's political power. Yet the city did not truly die. Its spirit lived on, absorbed into Persia, into Greece, into Rome. Every empire that followed carried a piece of Babylon within it. For Babylon was more than a city. It was an idea, the idea that humanity could once again reach the heavens, an idea that no flood, no fall, no silence could ever erase. Its ruins may crumble, its gods may fade, but the pattern endures. You can see it in every capital that rises from desert or forest. Grand avenues aligned to the stars, domes that mirror the sky, rulers claiming mandate from the divine. Babylon never ended. It only changed its name. Even in our time, the word Babylon carries a strange resonance. It means power. It means pride. It means the perpetual dream and danger of humanity's attempt to recreate heaven on earth. But in the shadow of that dream, something deeper has been preserved. For among the tablets recovered from its ruins, archaeologists found not only records of kings and wars, but hymns, ancient songs that still speak to a longing as old as the human soul. O Babylon, jewel of the earth, gate of the gods, your shadow is as vast as heaven, your voice as many as the stars. Babylon's fall was not the end of an empire. It was the beginning of memory, and memory, as the Sumerians knew, is a form of immortality. Yet one question remains unanswered. If Babylon preserved the wisdom of the gods, where did that wisdom go when the city finally fell into ruin? Did it vanish into dust, or was it carried forward, hidden among the nations, awaiting rediscovery? The answer may lie far from Mesopotamia, carried by wanderers who remembered the old gods not as idols, but as symbols of knowledge itself. The wanderers, the secret legacy of the Magi. When Babylon's walls finally fell silent, its knowledge did not. Across the deserts and mountains, a quiet migration began. Scribes, astronomers, priests, and philosophers carrying tablets of clay and fragments of memory wrapped in linen and faith. They called themselves Manu, the learned, but history would remember them by another name, the Magi. To later ages, they became sorcerers, mystics, dream interpreters. In truth, they were scientists of the sacred, heirs of the Sumerian astronomer priests who once read the sky as scripture. They traveled east into Persia, west into Egypt, and north into the lands of the Hittites and Greeks, preserving the cosmic grammar of Sumer beneath new symbols and tongues. In Persia, they found a new home among the followers of Zarathustra, a prophet who heard in the silence of the gods a single flame still burning. He called it Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, and declared that creation was the battlefield between truth and the lie, light and shadow. The Magi wove the old Sumerian cycles of order and chaos into this new vision. Enki's wisdom became the flame of reason, Enlil's authority, the law of righteousness. Thus, the world's first monotheistic philosophy was born from the ashes of polytheistic memory. From their fire temples, the Magi kept watch over the stars. They recorded eclipses, solstices, comets, believing that heaven's rhythm still whispered the will of the divine. Their calculations were astonishingly precise. Their calendars still echo in our own. Yet what they sought was not prediction, it was alignment. To live in harmony with the cosmos was to keep the covenant of the old gods alive. Some of these sages journeyed farther west, to the Nile. There, Egyptian priests recognized in them kindred spirits. Together they compared symbols, the eye of Ra and the eye of Enki, the boat of the sun and the Sumerian bark of the sky. In their union was born a fusion of wisdom that would later be called Hermeticism, the belief that, as above, so below, the eternal Sumerian doctrine of correspondence now clothed in Greek words. Others traveled beyond the Levant, carrying clay tablets translated into Aramaic and Greek. In the academies of Miletus and Alexandria, their teachings seeded the philosophies of Pythagoras, Plato, and Anaximander, men who spoke of cosmic harmony, sacred geometry, and immortal order, not realizing they were echoing hymns first sung in Eridu 5,000 years before. The Magi had become the invisible teachers of civilization, but their journey did not end with Greece. Legends tell of 3 Magi who followed a star across the desert, seeking the birth of a new king. Whether fact or allegory, the story endures because it captures a deeper truth. that the Watchers of Heaven were still searching for the return of divine kingship, the same descent that began in Sumer. Their journey symbolized humanity's unending pilgrimage toward the light that once walked among men. What, then, was the secret they carried? It was not gold or incense or myrrh. It was the memory of order, the knowledge that the cosmos is not chaos, but music, that every age, no matter how dark, is part of a rhythm that began long before humanity could write its name. To guard that rhythm was their oath. Over centuries, the Magi's wisdom fractured into schools and cults, Chaldean astrologers, Pythagorean brotherhoods, Zoroastrian priests, Jewish mystics, and early Christian theologians. Each kept a shard of the same crystal, polished it with new language, and passed it onward. The Anunnaki had vanished, but their song survived in equations, chants, and prayers. Even as empires fell, Persia to Greece, Greece to Rome, the chain of initiation remained unbroken. In Roman times, the Magi's descendants were the Chaldeans, priests who advised emperors and charted destinies. Their star charts became the basis of modern astronomy, their symbolism, the seed of alchemy and astrology. They called the stars Illumashu, the divine hosts, a phrase that would later echo as the heavenly host in sacred scripture. Language changed, the essence did not. Through every migration, one conviction endured, that knowledge and divinity are inseparable, and that to study the universe is an act of worship. This belief, born in the marshes of Sumer and refined in Babylon's libraries, still breathes in every observatory and equation. Each telescope aimed at the night sky is a descendant of a ziggurat. Each scientist who measures the heavens is, knowingly or not, a magus. Yet the Magi also carried a warning. They taught that when humanity forgets the sacred in its search for mastery, knowledge becomes a weapon. When it remembers, knowledge becomes light. Civilizations rise and fall according to how they balance those two truths. And so they wandered, not to conquer, but to remind. To whisper that the divine order still moves above us, that kingship still descends, not upon thrones of gold, but upon minds that seek with humility. Their trail vanishes into legend, but their legacy endures. In every faith that looks upward, in every science that looks outward, in every heart that still asks why the stars sing. For the Magi were never meant to stay. They were the last messengers of Sumer, the keepers of a flame that refused to die. The hidden thread. From Sumer to the mystery. School's history remembers empires by their monuments, but the true legacies of civilization move quietly, beneath the surface, like rivers of light flowing beneath the stone. From the ruins of Sumer and the ashes of Babylon, one such current continued to flow. It carried with it the sacred science of the gods, the rhythm of the me, the music of the stars, the remembrance of the descent from heaven. By the time it surfaced again, it had changed its name. It was no longer called kingship, or Anunnaki wisdom, or the knowledge of Eridu. It was called initiation. When the Magi dispersed, their teachings seeded the secret schools of the ancient world. In Egypt, they found new life among the priesthood of Thoth, god of writing, time, and balance, the Egyptian reflection of Enki. To the Egyptians, Thoth was the one who measured the heavens and set the stars in their places, the inventor of language and sacred geometry. His followers called their doctrine Hekau, the words of power, and their greatest mystery was that sound creates form. Every spoken vibration, they taught, is a bridge between worlds. This was nothing less than the me reborn, the Sumerian truth that divine order manifests through the word. In the shadowed halls of Heliopolis and Memphis, initiates learned to read the hidden architecture of the cosmos, the alignment of pyramids to Orion's belt, the solar journey through the Duat, the secret of the weighing of the heart. They believed that death was not an end but a passage, a cycle mirroring the movement of the stars through darkness and rebirth. And through these rituals, the wisdom of Sumer lived on, transformed into Egyptian form. From Egypt, the thread wound north to Greece, where it reappeared as philosophy and mystery. Thoth became Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes, master of wisdom, alchemy, and the hidden laws of reality. His writings, the Corpus Hermeticum, spoke of a single divine mind that shaped the universe, of correspondence between heaven and earth, and of the human soul as a fragment of the divine fire. The phrase, as above, so below, the essence of Hermeticism, was a direct echo of Sumer's belief that cosmic order governs both gods and men alike. In the mystery schools of Eleusis, Samothrace, and Delphi, the old star wisdom became the path of initiation. Students no longer worshipped external gods. They sought the divine spark within. The Anunnaki had taught mankind to look upward. The mysteries taught humanity to look inward, to rediscover the lost heaven inside the soul. Initiation was the descent and ascent reenacted, the same cosmic drama the King List had encoded in the rise and fall of dynasties, now played out within the human spirit. The Pythagoreans studied number and harmony as sacred truths, believing that mathematics was the language of the gods. Each ratio, each interval of sound mirrored celestial geometry, the same logic that once guided the priests of Uruk as they aligned their temples to the stars. To Pythagoras, the universe itself was a vast instrument, and human beings were the echoes of its strings. This was the wisdom of Eridu transposed into philosophy, that creation is not commanded, but sung. As centuries passed, the hidden thread grew more intricate. From Greek initiates it passed to the Romans, who veiled it beneath symbols of empire and myth. From Rome it flowed into the mysteries of Mithras, a god born from the rock, slayer of the bull, whose cave temples were painted with constellations, the same cosmic map the Sumerians had traced on clay. Every initiation reenacted the ascent of the soul through the spheres, guided by divine intermediaries, the new names of the Anunnaki. But the thread did not end there. In Alexandria, a city where Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, and Persian thought converged, scholars gathered the fragments of every sacred tradition into a single library of light. There, the Hermetic texts were studied beside Hebrew mysticism and Babylonian astrology. There, the old words of power became logos, the word that creates and sustains the cosmos. And from that synthesis would arise the philosophies that shaped the early Christian and Gnostic worlds. For the Gnostics, the universe was a drama of light and shadow, of divine beings descending and ascending through the material world, another retelling of the Sumerian descent of kingship. To know the truth, they said, was to remember one's origin. To awaken was to ascend again. Their secret initiation, the Gnosis, was nothing less than the rediscovery of the ancient covenant between heaven and earth, now within the human heart. Thus, from Eridu to Egypt, from Babylon to Greece, the same flame was passed hand to hand, generation to generation. Names changed, gods transformed, symbols evolved, but the message endured, that the cosmos is alive, that knowledge is sacred, and that humanity was created not as servant, but as participant in divine creation. The mystery schools of the ancient world did not survive the rise of dogma and empire. Many were destroyed, others hidden, yet their essence flowed into the veins of history through alchemy, Kabbalah, Sufism, and even the philosophies of the Renaissance. Each of these would claim new inspiration, but all were nourished by the same ancient current that began with the descent of kingship in Sumer. The old gods may have withdrawn, but their wisdom never vanished. It merely went underground, waiting, as it always had, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear the resonance of the forgotten word. Because every civilization that seeks truth walks the same path, from heaven to earth, from earth to spirit, from ignorance back to remembrance, and somewhere in that endless circle, the old flame still burns, flickering, patient, eternal, the lost science of the gods. When myth became memory. What if myth was never meant to be taken as story, but as instruction? What if the gods who once ruled for 241 to 200 years were not kings in flesh, but principles, living forces that expressed the architecture of the cosmos itself? By the classical age, the mystery schools no longer spoke of Enki or Inanna, but of harmony, number, and light. The divine descent had been translated into science, a sacred science, veiled in metaphor, guarded in symbols. This was the Sophia of the ancients, wisdom that saw no separation between physics and prayer, mathematics and myth. The Sumerians had described creation through me, divine decrees that encoded law, truth, and beauty. Thousands of years later, Pythagoras and Plato would speak of forms, ratios, and ideal numbers. To both, the world was not random. It was a harmonic structure, tuned to the vibration of heaven. To know those harmonies was to participate in the mind of the gods. This idea, simple yet profound, became the root of every occult or hidden discipline that followed. The Magi's astronomy evolved into astrology, their geometry into sacred architecture, their metallurgy into alchemy. Each was an attempt to reverse engineer the divine order, to rediscover the language through which heaven once spoke to earth. In the temples of Alexandria, this synthesis took on a new form. Scholars like Euclid, Eratosthenes, and Hipparchus were not merely mathematicians, they were heirs of the priestly astronomers of Uruk and Babylon. Their measurements of the earth and sky carried the same impulse, to restore the lost symmetry between the human world and the celestial one. When they calculated the circumference of the earth, when they mapped the motion of the stars, they were recreating the divine calendar that had been broken by the flood. Even the famous phrase carved into the temple of Apollo, "Know thyself," was a scientific and spiritual directive. To know oneself was to recognize the same geometry within the soul that governed the orbits of the stars. The microcosm mirrored the macrocosm. The body was a temple, the soul a cosmos in miniature. From this seed grew the sciences that would define the ancient and modern worlds alike. Alchemy, for example, was never merely about turning lead into gold. It was the spiritual continuation of the Sumerian and Hermetic quest for transformation, the belief that matter and spirit were two ends of the same continuum. The alchemist's furnace was a microcosmic version of creation itself, and the transmutation of metals mirrored the evolution of the soul. Fix the volatile, volatilize the fixed, they said, echoing the old Sumerian notion that heaven must descend and earth must ascend to meet in balance. Geometry, too, held divine significance. The builders of the pyramids, ziggurats, and temples understood that form shapes energy, that ratios create resonance. When the Greeks rediscovered these principles, they called them harmonics. When medieval architects revived them, they called them sacred geometry. Every cathedral spire, every dome, every compass and arch is an echo of those first Sumerian temples aligned to the stars. And music, perhaps the most mysterious of all, was seen as the audible signature of cosmic order. Plato spoke of the music of the spheres, the inaudible symphony created by the motion of celestial bodies. This was no metaphor. It was the continuation of a belief that stretched back to Enki's waters of creation, the vibration that shaped the world. To the ancients, harmony was not art. It was proof of the divine. When later scholars like Copernicus, Kepler, and Newton revived these ideas, they did so cloaked in the language of mathematics, but the spirit was the same. Kepler called his laws of planetary motion harmonices mundi, the harmony of the worlds. He believed, as the Sumerians had, that the cosmos was a song, each planet a note. Even Newton's obsession with alchemy and scripture was no eccentricity. It was the residue of the old belief that the laws of physics were the me rediscovered. Somewhere along the line, however, the sacred and the scientific split apart. The world that had once been a temple became a mechanism. The gods were banished, not by disbelief, but by categorization. Yet the equations remained, whispering the same truth in a new dialect, that order, symmetry, and resonance still govern creation. Today, when physicists describe string theory, vibrating filaments giving rise to all matter, they unknowingly repeat the oldest Sumerian teaching, that the universe is music made visible. When astronomers speak of the fabric of space-time, they are describing the same lattice the priests of Eridu called the net of Enki. When chemists pursue the philosopher's stone through fusion and transformation, they echo the alchemist's dream, and through them, the dream of the gods. Perhaps that is the secret meaning of the phrase, "The gods made man in their image," not of body, but of mind, creatures capable of reflection, of creation, of knowing, to think, to measure, to understand. These are the modern rituals of the old religion. The lost science of the gods was never lost at all. It became our curiosity, our mathematics, our drive to uncover the invisible structure of reality. Every telescope and particle accelerator is a modern ziggurat, each discovery a step toward remembering what the ancients already intuited, that divinity and science are not opposites, but reflections. And as humanity continues to explore, we inch closer to the same boundary the Sumerians once crossed, the threshold between knowledge and wisdom. For knowledge expands the world, but wisdom unites it, and only in unity can the divine order truly return. But there remains one final mystery in the King List, one that scholars and seekers alike have yet to unravel. If time itself began when kingship descended from heaven, what happens when it ascends again? The return of kingship, the prophecy of the cycles. Every civilization has told itself that its story was the first, and that its end would be the last. But the ancients knew better. The Sumerians, who measured the heavens before they named the earth, saw time not as a line, but as a circle, a cosmic spiral in which creation, destruction, and rebirth were not separate events, but recurring moments in the breath of eternity. To them, every flood, every fall, every silence of the gods was part of the same pulse, the rhythm of descent and ascent, heaven and earth, forever exchanging their thrones. The Sumerian King List was not just history, it was prophecy. Each dynasty, each span of years, was a cycle, a heartbeat in the life of the cosmos. When the list declares that kingship descended from heaven, it does not describe a singular miracle. It describes a pattern, the periodic renewal of divine order on earth. And when it says that the flood swept over the land, it marks not the end of the world, but the completion of an age. According to the Sumerian reckoning, the pre-flood rains spanned 241,200 years, the great cycle of divine presence. After the deluge, the numbers shrink, the divine light dims, and humanity enters a slower, denser rhythm of time. It is as if the vibration of heaven retreated from the material world, leaving behind only echoes. Yet those echoes have always grown louder before each renewal. Across the world, other civilizations told the same story. The Hindus spoke of yugas, great epochs cycling from light to darkness and back again. The Maya measured time in suns, each age destroyed by its own element before rebirth. The Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time, and awaited its return. And the Greeks remembered the golden age of Kronos and prophesied that it would one day come again. All different tongues, all the same rhythm. Could the Sumerians have known that the heavens themselves move in cycles of vast duration? The precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, takes about 25,920 years to complete. Divide that into 10 segments, and you have roughly 2,592 years per age. The same pattern reflected in the turning of history: rise, zenith, decline, collapse, renewal. Every empire, every faith, every civilization seems to obey this cosmic metronome. As above, so below. The tablets of Enki speak of the appointed times of kingship, when the gods renew their covenant with the world. They descend, not as flesh and fire, but as consciousness, as sudden awakenings of knowledge, art, and moral clarity. Each descent marks a new dawn. Sumer, Egypt, Greece, the Renaissance, the scientific revolution. Each time, humanity rises closer to remembering its origin. Each time, the veil thins between heaven and earth. Perhaps this is what the ancients meant by the return of kingship, not the reappearance of gods in the sky, but the reawakening of the divine within humanity, the point where knowledge and wisdom, science and spirit once again become one. The Sumerians also spoke of cycles of shadow, ages when the divine light wanes and mankind forgets. They believed that as the heavens moved away from alignment with the seat of Anu, the material world would grow heavy, chaotic, and lost in confusion. But when the stars return to their ancient alignment, the gates of heaven open once more. And here lies the most haunting aspect of their prophecy. They believed that the cycles would repeat exactly, that the same patterns of arrogance, collapse, and rebirth would continue until mankind learned the ultimate secret of kingship, that heaven is not a place to reach, but a state to embody. In their own words, when men remember heaven within themselves, the gods shall return. For millennia, this prophecy was read as metaphor, but modern science has, in its own language, begun to echo it. Cosmic cycles of climate, magnetism, and orbit govern the rise and fall of civilizations. Mass extinctions and rebirths follow patterns stretching across eons. Even consciousness itself, the rhythm of collective thought, the pulse of innovation and forgetting, seems to move in waves. Could it be that the return of kingship is not supernatural, but evolutionary? That each cycle brings humanity closer to the frequency once shared with its creators? If so, we stand at the edge of another turning. Ancient astronomers marked our present era, the transition from Pisces to Aquarius, as a moment of awakening when the waters of knowledge pour once again upon the earth. Aquarius, the water-bearer, is the bringer of renewal, the one who pours the Abzu, the waters of Enki, back into the world. The symbol is older than astrology itself. It is the memory of the first city, Eridu, where kingship first descended from the heavens. Perhaps the ancients were not warning us of an apocalypse, but preparing us for a rebirth. The floods of the past were physical. The next may be spiritual, a surge of understanding that washes away ignorance rather than cities. A new descent of kingship, not upon thrones of gold, but upon the mind of humankind. Every cycle begins in silence, and as the noise of our own age grows deafening with data, with chaos, with the clamor of a world that has forgotten its roots, it may be that we are approaching that silence again, the stillness before descent. The Sumerian tablets end with a statement both mysterious and serene. The kingship shall return to Eridu, not as empire, not as stone, but as remembrance. The place where it began shall be the place where it awakens. Eridu, the city of the deep, the dwelling of Enki, the place of the first covenant. And perhaps, within the human spirit, Eridu has never truly fallen, for the divine experiment is not over. The circle is almost closed, and what descends next may not be gods but ourselves, awakened, remembering, radiant with the light we once received from the stars. Eridu reborn, the eternal return of the gods. In the southern desert of Iraq, near the dry bed of an ancient river, lies a low mound of dust. Nothing in its barren landscape hints that this place once shone like the heart of heaven. Yet beneath those layers of clay sleeps Eridu, the first city, the cradle of kingship, the birthplace of civilization. It is here, the Sumerians said, that the descent began, and perhaps here, too, it will begin again. For millennia, time has folded upon itself like waves returning to the shore. Empires rose and fell, gods were born and forgotten. Humanity learned to fly, to reason, to dream. But the story written in the King List never ended. It only paused. Its last line still hums like a prophecy waiting for its echo. Then the kingship returned to Eridu. When archaeologists unearthed the ruins of this forgotten city, they found 17 layers of temples stacked one upon another, each a new world built upon the bones of the old. At the deepest layer lay a simple shrine to Enki, god of wisdom, whose waters once birthed the world. From that shrine flowed the mythic Abzu, the deep source of all life. It was said that when Enki first raised Eridu from the floodplain, he did so not with power, but with understanding, the knowledge of how heaven and earth might coexist. Eridu was the prototype of harmony. Standing there today, amid winds that have blown for 6,000 years, one feels the strange pulse of continuity. The sand covers the bricks, the reeds sway where rivers once ran, and the silence is immense. Yet in that silence lies a sense of expectancy, as though something ancient sleeps beneath the ground, dreaming of return. Maybe the Sumerians were not predicting the rebuilding of a literal city, but the reawakening of what Eridu represented, the moment when divine consciousness and human existence touched in equilibrium. In every era since, we have sought to rebuild that state, in temples, in science, in art, in the secret chambers of our own thoughts. Every renaissance, every enlightenment, every act of compassion is a small piece of Eridu reborn. The gods may not descend in flame as the poets once imagined. They may awaken instead as insight, as empathy, as the quiet certainty that life itself is sacred order made visible. When we discover new worlds beyond the stars, when we decode the language of DNA, when we gaze into the quantum fabric of reality, we are doing what Enki did in myth, plumbing the deep, listening for the heartbeat beneath creation. Perhaps the Anunnaki were never external beings, but reflections of what humanity can become when it remembers its source. Their descent was the spark of consciousness, their reign the flowering of wisdom, their departure the long night of forgetfulness that drove us to seek the light again. If that is true, then their return is not a visitation, but a realization. The moment when we recognize that the gods never left. They live in every act of curiosity, in every act of creation, in the moral courage to choose harmony over chaos. Eridu, the city of beginnings, becomes a symbol for the heart of humanity, a temple beneath the dust, waiting to be uncovered. Each of us is its archaeologist. Each discovery, whether in science, art, or spirit, brushes away a little more of the sand. The circle of kingship was always a dialogue between heaven and earth. Now the conversation turns inward. The crown that once gleamed on the brow of Alulim or Gilgamesh is the same crown of awareness resting unseen upon every human mind. The descent from heaven was the moment we began to know ourselves. The return to Eridu is the moment we understand what that knowledge was for. Across the world, we are building again, cities of light, networks of thought, civilizations reaching for the stars. In this new ascent, we repeat the ancient pattern, but perhaps this time we will remember the balance the Sumerians tried to teach. That knowledge without reverence becomes Babel, that power without wisdom becomes flood, that the divine and the human are not enemies, but halves of the same whole. At sunset, the desert over Eridu glows red, then violet, then black. The stars appear, familiar, unchanged since the first priests of Enki mapped them in wet clay. They form the same constellations, the same pathways of gods. Somewhere among them, the cycle turns again, and another age begins. The King List closes its final line not with an ending, but with a return, because the story of humanity is not a ladder to the sky. It is a wheel, forever spinning, forever renewing, forever remembering. And in the stillness between each revolution, the gods whisper again, softly as wind over the ruins. After kingship descended from heaven, it returned to Eridu, the first city, the last temple, the eternal mirror, where gods and mortals see themselves as one. Epilogue, the circle completed. And so, the tale comes full circle, from the descent of kingship to the flood that cleansed the world, from Babylon's towers to the hidden flame of the Magi, from myth to science, from gods to memory. In every age, we have built new Eridus, raised new ziggurats, sought new heavens. Perhaps the next descent will not come from above, but from within. For the legacy of the Anunnaki was never about dominion. It was about remembrance, that we are children of the stars, keepers of the divine order, architects of our own awakening. And as the dawn rises again over the ruins of Sumer, the circle begins anew. The kingship has never left. It only waits for us to remember that we are, and have always been, its heirs.